Yeah, I'm excited to be here today. We've done a couple of past webinars where we've gone into the basics of continuous integration and even looking a little bit beyond it. Today, I thought it would be a great opportunity to step back and talk about some of the great features of TeamCity, the features that I think really help TeamCity shine for you. So we'll walk through all those various different features in a couple of different scenarios and give you guys some real world hands-on examples maybe to take a look at. We've kind of polled people in advance and put together some content that hopefully matches everybody's appetite and their background and experience level. Nonetheless, if you have questions, please ask as we go. And we'll have a lot of demos, so I'm hoping to show you guys some of the inner workings of this. The first part where I want to start out is just to talk about three separate things that combined together work as a great example to kick things off here. The first thing is just the simplicity of working with TeamCity. And a lot of the past webinars, we haven't dived into setting everything up. So what I want to do is just walk through the setup of a simple process inside of TeamCity. And I'll go through that in a minute here, but once we get that set up, then we'll use that as a foundation to talk about some of the great testing features within the TeamCity interface. And then also we're going to branch off into IDE integration with the various different plugins for various different IDEs. Just to help give you an overall picture of what we're going to look at, we're going to start within TeamCity just setting up a simple continuous integration process for a .NET application. That simple process starts out first with pulling in a version control repository. Once we get that set up, then we'll create a build in TeamCity, which is that process. And many of you are already familiar with this. This will help if anybody's not familiar with how TeamCity works, though. To orient yourself, a build is an automated process that kicks off and runs a set of tasks. Inside of that build process, we'll set three things up for a .NET project, which would be rather typical for a .NET continuous integration process. And that first step will be we'll restore packages, we'll pull third-party dependencies via NuGet. We'll then compile the application and run some tests on it. We'll do this so we can look at some of the advanced features of testing and test reporting within the interface, and then dive into the IDE integration. We'll also look at an example toward the end of the IDE integration discussion here with WebStorm as well. So if you're an IntelliJ user, please hang on. We'll have a specific example for you to look at as well. The last part of this sample we'll set up is a simple trigger that kicks this process off every time we check something into version control, so we can see what it's like to work between the IDE integration and having things automatically running inside of TeamCity. So I'm going to start out by hopping over to TeamCity, and let's just get all of this stuff set up. It seems like a lot of stuff, but at the end of the day, one of the things I love about TeamCity is that it's really easy to set up a simple build process. Now, right now I'm on the default page in TeamCity when I log in, and that's just kind of my home screen where I can see past build configurations and builds, if you will, that I've set up. At this point, I've tried to clean the slate a little bit so we could start fresh here. And I have a project in TeamCity called Shine where we'll set everything up. Now at this point, I do have one build set up, but we're actually going to set up a new build configuration just so you can see what that looks like. And we'll plug in those steps we talked about. So we can simply go into the TeamCity interface and create a build configuration. And if you will, this is like the definition of the process that we're going to run. Creating it just simply starts with taking a name. So we'll call this just a .NET testing example. We could also maybe call this .NET testing - continuous integration or commit. Various different names you could call this, whatever you would like. We create that, then the next step in that process, just like I had in my diagram, is to plug in the version control repository that we're going to use. Now in this very first example, I'm going to be using an SVN repository so we can show some of the SVN features with IDE integration. To create or link our repository, we can choose Subversion from the list here. And one of the other nice things about TeamCity out of the box is it comes with great support, as you can see here, for I would say, the majority of the version control systems you're ever going to work with, notably Subversion, Git, Mercurial, even CVS, TFS. So lots of different version control repository systems you can plug in right out of the box. To create or link to our version control repository, give me one sec, I need to pull my notes up here and get the link to it. I simply need to copy a link to my SVN repository. I'm also going to name these settings with the link as well. I have a local SVN repository. And then all I need to do is scroll way down to the bottom here and just click test connection. And of course, hopefully everything works okay, and it does. Gives me success back, and so I know that the TeamCity has found the version control repository. We can click create then to plug that in. So it's as simple as it was to integrate the version control repository. All right, and then the next step in the process is to start setting up the build steps. And under the build steps, now we can auto detect things. I'm just going to walk through this one at a time to show, even if you're not using auto detection, that it's still simple to set this up. There's a nice feature that was added, I believe, in 8, TeamCity 8, to auto detect build steps, but we'll add some of these manually. Now, out of the box, there are a lot of great runner types available. I also have a few plugins installed, so you'll see some extra steps, but most of these come out of the box. Another great feature of TeamCity, you don't need to worry about finding the particular runner type that you need. A lot of the typical build tools come supported out of the box. For example, the very first step we want to run through is to perform a NuGet installation, sorry, a NuGet restore. And to run that NuGet restore, all I really need to specify is a path to the solution file. And one of my favorite other features is just the ability to browse through a repository in a tree view here and pick the exact file that I want to reference, so I don't have to type this out by hand and remember the path myself. And then I can just save those settings, and that's all it'll take to add restoring packages to this build process. So that was the very first step, is just to restore packages. The next step is to then compile the application. So I'll hop back, I'll add another step for that. And this time I'm going to use another out-of-the-box runner type, which is a Visual Studio solution. And again, all I need to do here is point to the location of the solution file. Again, I can use the tree view to map to that, and then I can save that. All right, and then the last thing I need to do is just add a build step. And this build step is going to be for an in-unit test, another runner type that comes out of the box. So if you will, the runner types are various different tools you can plug in to a build process that will run every time you kick off that build process. And these run sequentially. Now, the only thing I need to do here is specify where my tests are at. Now, since this is an entry where you can put multiple files or paths or wildcards, expressions, there's no tree view flyout to help me in this case, but I can simply point at the tests in the project, and we'll take a look at this project in a minute. I simply need to point at the test DLL. This is pretty typical with various testing tools. You just need to point wherever your tests are at. And then that's all I need to do to specify that I'd like to run tests as a part of this process as the last step. I can save that then. And then I said the last thing we would do after we run our tests is kick off this build process. Every time we will trigger this with somebody checking changes into version control. We can go over to TeamCity, go to triggers. We can add a new trigger, pick a version control trigger. Now there are a bunch of different settings we can set, but the defaults work just fine. In fact, I'll hide the advanced options there. All we need to say is VCS trigger and save that. All right, that was it. It was about maybe 5 or 6 minutes to get set up an entire build process for a .NET application. Now let's see if it actually works and if I didn't mess anything up in the process there. So we can kick it off in TeamCity by just hitting the run button. That's just manually triggering the process to run. Now we also have that version control trigger, but we haven't changed anything in our version control repository. So we we don't have anything to trigger a run. We will do that in a minute here though, so we can see that as well. All right, looks like everything actually ran here. Now it's red and failing, and that was intentional because I set up an example that we can walk through where we have a failing test for an application. Right inside of the interface here, you get test information back. And part of what when I was talking, perhaps might not have been obvious. I'm going to go to the history tab here and run this again. So let's go to the overview tab here. I just kicked off another run of this number 2. You'll get status information back as things are running, and the various steps in the process that are executing, you'll know what step in the process is executing. Also notice right here, one very important piece of information is we already have 2 test results back before everything completed. Now that didn't take too long, but now when it's finally done, we have 1 test that failed and 2 that passed. I'm going to run that again just so we can see that we're getting on-the-fly test results, which is extremely helpful to be able to get information very early on the first test failure and not need to wait until all the tests are complete to find out which ones failed. A lot of people talk about failing fast as far as getting information. Here we go again. We've got 2 of the test results back. All right, now we have all 3 of them back. A lot of people talk about failing fast, and as a result, talk about partitioning and splitting up tests so that you put all your fast tests together and all your slow tests thereafter. Now, I'm not going to say that you don't still want that partitioning, but one of the benefits of TeamCity with early on-the-fly test reporting, it doesn't really matter if your test suite takes 1 minute or 5 minutes. You're not going to wait 5 minutes to get the test results back. You can start getting results back within a couple of seconds, actually, about the first tests passing and failing. So you don't necessarily have to follow religiously a rule that you have to only run your fast tests as a part of the tests that run every time somebody checks into version control. That just means that you don't have to bother so much with artificially partitioning your tests. Some tools you have to do that because you don't get your test results back until all the tests have completed. On-the-fly testing is a really nice feature to work around that. All right, the next thing, and maybe I should stop and ask for any questions about the setup process before we move on. And it's okay if there are no questions, just want to clear those out.
I don't see any questions about setup process, but there's one from Ruslan, and which is not answered yet. And he asks the following. He says, I use TeamCity for testing and build .deb, my project. The stack is Python and Django. Artifact of build is a .deb package. And the question is how to make TeamCity send a notice of availability of build. For example, to make an HTTP request?
Not certain I entirely understand that. Perhaps maybe there could be a follow-up question, but are we talking about getting a notification when the build finishes, or are we talking about maybe something else? And I'll leave that out there to come back to later.
Okay.
All right.
No, yeah, there's one more question from Eric. Do you need the NuGet installer step if the solution was enabled with auto restore packages?
I believe, yeah, like it's kind of I've got it to work both ways is the long story short. If you have the older enable package restore functionality set up, you can plug that in and see what happens more or less. You might have to do a few tweaks to get that to work. What I would recommend is if that breaks down, just use the NuGet installer restore step. It's a little bit more straightforward.
Okay, and one more question
involved. Yep.
Yeah, one more question from Michael. Does the on-the-fly reporting work if we were to run the NUnit runner through PowerShell? And if not, is it possible to do that?
It really depends on, TeamCity has great extensibility for other tools to report back about testing beyond just what comes out of the box. As long as those tools, and or any of the tools that do exist, As long as whatever tools you're using are reporting results on the fly, as test results are coming back, you'll get those on the fly in TeamCity. However, there are some extensions people have built where the test results come back at the end and then you can't get the results until the end. But as long as they're reporting on the fly, and service messages are a great way for those tools to do that, which are just console output basically about test status, then yes, you can get on the fly results as well.
Yeah, okay, I think that's it for now.
All right, so when things fail, so I've run this a couple of times so we could see that we can get some information early, but when things fail, we want to dig into that. Now within the TeamCity interface itself, we can, for example, go to this particular build that's failing. We can go to the high-level test information here that we came back, how many we have passing and where our failures are at. We can also dive into the test tab itself. And the test tab is kind of a first line of defense, if you will, to figure out what went wrong with a set of tests inside of your build process. You can see things, for example, what's passing, what's failing. You can filter on just what's failing. For failing tests, you can take this a step further and you can click on a particular test, see some test history. That might be a little more exciting when we get done here with some more examples. I'll open that up though. You can also jump into the build log for the particular test failure and jump right to the point where the test failure happened if, for example, there's a stack trace that might be more helpful or some more information that would help you figure out what went wrong. You also have the test history as well, so you can see for this particular test how long it was taking, duration chart, and the status across past builds. So there's build 1, 2, and 3. We've run this 3 times, so there's 3 results for this test. We can see they're all failing, so it's not too exciting. One of the things I want to dive into today, though, is if you have the IDE plugins installed, and you can get those from the flyout here for a user, they can just jump into My Settings and Tools inside of TeamCity and download them. You can also download them via the web. And if you have ReSharper for the .NET space, the new ReSharper Ultimate installer includes the TeamCity plugin as an option. So that's another way to get that. Anyways, with one of these plugins, and we'll look at ReSharper first with or Visual Studio / ReSharper first. There's also Eclipse and IntelliJ. So there's quite a few different plugins. If you have one of those installed, then on the very first screen where we're looking at our results, we can click the Open in IDE button. And then I can come over to TeamCity here. Sharpers. Okay, and then the window opened up over here. Sorry about that. I'll bring that over and show that on the right side of my screen. You can see we have the fail fast test giving us the test failure information we just saw within TeamCity. I can even click on that test, open right up to the source code where that test is at. I can also come right here and just hit this green button and the unit test session will open up. Again, that's off the screen, so I'll bring that over here, split the screen here maybe, and pull this down. Right from within Visual Studio, I can start to debug what went wrong. So I have the failure from TeamCity. Again, that comes from just clicking the Open in IDE button. And then I can right from there run the tests that are failing. So I can start basically debugging what's going wrong. So I could come over and come into the code and look at what's going wrong. Well, we expected -1, and I'll shrink this down a little bit. If I jump into this method, subtraction is actually multiplying. That was an intentional mistake, so we could look at this. I can fix or do what I think is a fix. I can run the failing tests again. Again, this is with ReSharper, the TeamCity ReSharper combination. I see my test is now failing, so I think everything's okay at this point. So a great workflow to go from a problem that TeamCity picked up with a failing test right into the IDE so that I could figure out maybe a little bit more about what's going on. And then I can get the test passing again, specifically the test or tests that were failing within TeamCity. But then one of the nice features, since I'm using SV in here, and actually there's a way to do this with different version control repositories. We can talk about that. But with SVN specifically, I'm going to walk you through what you can do then to say, hey, you know what? I would like to test things out in TeamCity before I check this in and share it with other people. So in addition to running the test and feeling like that was the right fix, there may be scenarios where running the test is not enough confidence. We'll look at inspections a little bit later with WebStorm. Right from within Visual Studio, then, if I'd like to take this a step further and have a little more confidence, I can log in, and I've already done that here, to the TeamCity server, and then underneath the TeamCity menu here, I can choose a remote run, which will start out by just showing me local changes I've made to my project. You can see it picked up the change I just made to that calculator CS file to add subtraction, or to perform subtraction instead of multiplication. So I can check that then. And then in the upper left corner here, I can configure a personal build. So TeamCity, in addition to just regular builds that run automatically, or when somebody goes in and pushes the button in TeamCity, you can also configure personal builds and kick those off right from the IDE. And because I'm using SVN, this will take basically a patch of the changes and run them, send them over to TeamCity, let TeamCity run those changes. And in this case, it's asking me what would I like to run, and I'm going to tell it I would like to run that build that we just set up called net testing-ci, so I'll check that. And I'll say, see if this fixes test. I'm going to uncheck the pre-tested commit box. I could also have it check in if everything's okay. So this is a nice pre-tested commit workflow as well, but I'm just first going to run this process. Actually, my time's running a little low. I might check that as well. If no new tests have failed, I will go ahead and check in as well. So let's run all of that. They'll make a call out to TeamCity, send the patch of the changes I've made, and start executing a personal build. Now, if I'd like to see what that looks like without opening up TeamCity, I can actually go to My Changes. I can expand this out here. And it looks like it's still running at this point. So right inside of right inside of Visual Studio, I can pull up the builds that are running for builds that I'm watching or subscribed to. And you could see it was spinning, now it's done. So we now have 3 tests passing. Now, just to show you that's the same thing we've been looking at in the interface with TeamCity, I can actually open in the website the results of this personal build, and we can indeed see that this is passing. I can even hop back to the home page, go to the .NET testing build configuration. Now notice it's still a failing build, and that's because I just ran a personal build. That's not an actual build, it's a personal build just for me. If I go to the overview tab or the history tab, I can see the personal build, and you can see there's a little person on it. And when I hover over it, you can even see the message that I typed in when I kicked this whole process off. Now, because this is saying that I have 3 tests passing now, I'm pretty confident that everything's okay at this point. And then if I go back to the home screen here, and actually that should also then kick off, unless my version control repository trigger is not set up or not detecting it yet. We should have checked in a change after that. Oh, and we did. It took a few seconds to come up there. You can see TeamCity has already kicked off a number 5 build that's not a personal build, it's an actual build now. So because I did my pre-tested commit, or sorry, my personal build followed by a pre-tested commit, then the integration inside of Visual Studio went ahead and did an SVN commit. TeamCity has now detected that SVN commit, and it's kicking off the regular build process just to make sure everything is actually okay beyond my personal build. You can see it's passed successfully at this point. I can even click on that build, look at the history. Now you see the personal build and the actual build. So it's a nice workflow for people to go about working inside of the IDE, fix a problem. If they would like to just try it out and see what happens in TeamCity, they can do that, followed by an automatic commit. And then if you have an automated trigger on top of that, a regular run will run as well. It may seem redundant, but it at least makes sure that things are working both via personal builds and the regular build process as well. just in case anybody's interested in the Git space, in the distributed VCS space, actually with Git and Mercurial, there is what's known as a branch remote run trigger if you would like similar pre-tested commit functionality. And that's where within ReSharper, basically you would do a Git commit, and then you would push that to a special branch pattern that you can set up yourself in TeamCity, and it will run personal builds off of that, and they won't look like real builds. So a little bit different workflow, but same capability to basically do a test inside of TeamCity and see if things are okay, and then go ahead and actually commit it to your main branch in your repository. So it's one of the nice features is not only do you get, of course, Java wants to update, not only do you get on-the-fly reporting inside of the website, you also get it inside of your IDE if you have the plugin available. In fact, you can see past runs of mine here today, past days, so you can navigate through the information in TeamCity right inside of your IDE's interface. And of course, you can jump back and forth to the website from the IDE and from the website back to the IDE. Any questions so far?
Yeah, Wes, there is a question from Phil. He's asking whether there is a way to force a personal build as part of the check-in process, for example, via hooks.
What type of repository system, I guess, would be my question.
Subversion.
Subversion.
Yeah.
Yeah. If people are working outside of this workflow, I haven't set anything up like that. I'm sure if you would like to, you could interact with the API and do some of that, but you know, that's not, I'm not going to speak to that because I haven't set that up. Typically, it's one of these things where this is a process that I don't see people forcing on people so much as I see empowering people with it. If I want to run a personal build, it's because perhaps I think that something on my environment isn't quite the same as all the things that we check in CI. I'm not saying that, you know, CI is somehow different and I'm trying to avoid works on my machine, but maybe continuous integration does some advanced inspections that I'm not set up to do on my local machine, and I'd like to kick those off. That's typically a personal decision that developers make. I know some people like to force that workflow, but I think that at least having the capability and empowering people with it is probably the better approach to get value out of it. Yeah, can take this a little bit further. Inside of the TeamCity interface under the config settings for this project, I'll go back to the build steps and I'll go to NUnit specifically. I want to talk about this for a minute. One nice feature with NUnit, I'm not certain of all the other coverage for all the other test runners, but one nice thing is you can prioritize running the tests that have failed recently. So TeamCity will keep track of what's failed recently and run those first, so that that on-the-fly test reporting is trying the things that are most likely to fail first so that you can get back to work as quickly as possible. The other nice thing out of the box is you have integrated dotCover support. All you have to do is literally pick dotCover if you're using NUnit, and then save those settings changes. And then if I run this build again, this time, in addition, pulling coverage information, I go back and wait for the results to come back here. Maybe I'll hop over to Visual Studio and refresh and see if we get any results. Coverage will take a few seconds extra to process. Some people like to delay this into a subsequent step, but at least for your unit tests, if coverage is important to you, and again, it's not about necessarily beating people over the head with it, it's about making it available to people because it can be expensive to compute. You could have your build server doing that. And then within ReSharper, TeamCity, there's a coverage option where you can pull coverage information. And here's the particular run that I had done. And I can choose that run. It'll load up coverage information for me with the integrated dotCover. That's a part of ReSharper Ultimate now. I can split the screen there. I can navigate through just a summary here. I also, you can see right inside of the IDE, you can see green lines that are covered, pink lines or red lines that are not covered. So you can load a coverage profile, if you will, right out of TeamCity. So TeamCity is doing the hard work for you, and then you can just pull up the results right inside of the IDE. So this might be nice for somebody that in the personal build process kicks all this off, and they'd also like to look at the coverage that came out of the personal build as well, if they didn't run all of the coverage in their own local environment exactly the same way as it is in CI. So really simple features, nice integration between the two, because the reality is at the end of the day, it's great to have all this information coming out of an automated environment like TeamCity, but it's not so useful if it's just sitting in a web page somewhere or sitting in a file somewhere. It's much more useful if we're getting that rich information right inside of our IDE so we can do something about it. If I hop back real quickly, I would like to talk about the testing tab very briefly again. Maybe we'll go to that failing test that we initially had and just refresh this here. You can see we've run this many more times now. One of these is a personal build, but we have all this information now to know when this test passed for the first time. We know it's okay now. We can see durations of the test. So we have a lot of rich information about this test that's building up now, even with 6 different runs here. So if something goes wrong in the future, this can be a great point to come back to figure out that somebody else had worked on this before. You can see my name right here is working on this particular personal build. So if a test started failing again, perhaps you could go find quickly the person that had fixed it in the past to see what may or may not be the issue. All right, I'm going to stop there because that's the end of the .NET demo, and I want to hop to WebStorm IntelliJ next, but I'll ask for questions while I'm doing that.
Yeah, I don't see any new questions this far. Maybe there will appear some.
Fantastic. So this plugin is not just a ReSharper .NET thing. It's also all the IntelliJ IDEs. You can install this plugin. I have WebStorm here today, and we'll walk through just a very few basic things. Over inside of TeamCity, I've already set up a build for this particular project. This is just a very simple web starter kit. It's just HTML and JavaScript, just to keep this very simple here. And I'm going to close out a few of the tabs here. And I'm going to go to the Projects tab first. So when you install the TeamCity plugin to the IntelliJ suite of IDEs, the very first thing you can do is come to the Projects tab. That's a part of this TeamCity window that you get. And from there, you can specify what projects you would like to listen to. Now, these come up as notification rules, and we'll talk a little more about notification later on, but I can basically add a notification rule and say, hey, inside of the IDE, if I have the plugin installed, and this is for the IntelliJ plugin, I could say, I could decide what I would like to listen to. And I'm just going to say builds from, let's just pick the Shine project. So I can specify exactly what I want to listen to, and then send me notifications. I can specify that as well. Let's just grab everything whenever there's a failure or a successful build. So we'll get notification after every build. So I can save that then. Now these are also settings that can be set up and shared with users, so users don't have to do this individually, but they also can set this up to their own liking. Sometimes that works better so that people aren't bombarded with notifications. But now that I've set up an IDE notification, when I go back to WebStorm then, you can see there's the Shine project, and if I expand it out, there is a web build configuration that I've already set up. So I'm not going to walk through that process because it looks a lot like what we've already done, but what this particular build is doing is just running inspections. So beyond just compiling and testing code, you might want to inspect code. And this particular one runs the integrated IntelliJ inspections within TeamCity. So all the different inspections you get right inside of WebStorm or any of the IntelliJ IDEs, for example, this typo in a word, or any other issues you might have. For example, if I have an unused variable, I get that information right inside of the IDE, but then I can also run inspections inside of the continuous integration environment just to keep an eye on the number of issues that I have. This is literally just a web starter kit sample, and out of the box, it's got quite a few issues. I won't go into that, but I've added here an extra issue in typing that additional line of code. I've run this build in the past before. You can see right here is the last run of it. You can see in the summary information, instead of tests failing and passing like we saw the last time, this is running inspections. So this is telling us the total number of inspections, and of those, 114 are considered errors. I've added another issue here, or inspection violation, if you will, here. So let's say I'm going about coding and I'm making changes to this project, and I decide at some point that I would like to go ahead and check my changes in. But again, first, I might like to see if I've caused any problems that I'm not aware of. Even though I'm getting information inside the IDE, grayed out variable here that's unused, I might miss that. I might go about my day and be so busy that I forget it, get distracted, whatever it might be. So I have continuous integration to kind of do a double check, if you will. Again, because there's that capability of running personal builds, I could have TeamCity just check over things for me just so nothing's wrong, and then I could fix things before I check in. Now, with Git, this is an example with Git instead of SVN. It's not sending a patch anymore. Inside of WebStorm or the IntelliJ suite, you actually have the ability to run outstanding changes, which are commits that have not yet been pushed. So what I need to do is just make a local commit with the change I've made. You can do that right here inside of WebStorm. I can commit the changes. I can say aptly say I break the JavaScript for the demo, and then I can commit that. And now I can go up to the TeamCity menu, and I can choose run or remote run outstanding changes. This little dialog pops up a lot like we saw inside of the Visual Studio integration, and I can then submit running this particular web build configuration, which will see if I've added any inspection issues. I can submit that, then I can go back right inside of the IDE here to the TeamCity tab, and you can see that number 9, there's a little person on it, kind of hard to see, but you can see that's a personal build running. It's initializing. I can double click on it and actually see the log of what's going on. It's analyzing the code right now. All right, it's done. Get a little bit of information, but this is the build log. It's not too exciting. I also get this nice notice up here. Now, even if I'm not looking at this TeamCity window inside of my IDE, because I have the plugin installed, I get notifications inside of the IDE. So maybe I've checked something in and I forgot to do a personal build and it causes an issue. I could be getting notified about that while I'm continuing to work on whatever it is I'm working on next. So I get a notification in addition to being able to look at the information. But anyways, the nice thing here is I have some nice integration to kick off a personal build. And then actually I have the My Changes feature as well, where I can look specifically at not just projects that I've subscribed to, but all the changes that apply to me. And I can see that remote run there that I just run. I've actually run quite a few of these in preparation for the demo, but I can see that remote run I ran there. I can expand it out. You can see number 9, that's the one we just ran. I also can, of course, hop into the browser to see what is going on inside of TeamCity. Now it said this here too. I have +1 in the summary here. That means I introduced a new inspection violation. It's not considered an error because there would be a +1 next to that if it were, but it is a new issue. So maybe I would like to do something about it, and I don't remember all the code I've changed at this point. I could come over to the TeamCity interface, view the code inspection report. I've by default got this box checked that says, just show me what I did in this particular build. Just show me the problems I introduced. I can expand out this one file and I can see unused local variable. I can actually click to go back to that particular line. You can see that the cursor is highlighted, and I can then go about fixing that problem by just getting rid of that particular variable that's unused. So again, nice workflow where I can go about it regardless if it's Visual Studio or any of the IntelliJ IDEs or Eclipse. Nice workflows where I can go about getting some information before I go ahead and actually commit my changes, in the case of Git, before I actually push those changes to somebody else. All right, I'm going to I'm going to move into the next demo, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to take those at this time.
Yeah, I don't see any so far.
All
We
right,
can just move on.
fantastic. Fantastic. Okay, so the next area where TeamCity shines, just recap, that was the IDE testing, simplicity of setting things up. The next area is the setting up what's known as a build chain in TeamCity. A lot of people talk about these also as pipelines. This is a feature I see underutilized a lot when I'm talking with people. This is the ability to go beyond just a simple build process and start composing multiple processes together to form a pipeline, perhaps a deployment pipeline. Today, I want to show just a very simple orchestration of the database delivery component of a pipeline. So we're going to set up 3 separate builds now. They'll all be very simple. We're just plugging scripts into them. I'll show you how that works in a minute. But 3 separate builds that are going to pull scripts from the repository to test database changes. So database changes is an area of pain. I don't see a lot of people taking advantage of that either. I thought it would be kind of cool to mix and match these 2 topics together. The first part of this process in continuous integration and thinking about the database side of things, and a lot of people use migration frameworks, so they're writing little scripts or little code snippets that take a database and apply some changes to it to take it to the next version. So when we have those checked into version control, it would be nice to get feedback if anything is wrong with those little scripts that are going to take our database to the next version. So the very first process of this, and this is very subjective, you could come up with your own, but the first step of this process could be to start out, which is a clean slate, so an empty database, and then apply all the changes to that database that we've ever written for this particular application. So if you started from day one, or even if you migrated to a migration framework somewhere in between working on your project, you can literally just take all the migrations and apply them to a blank database. Everything should be okay when that happens. And if everything's not okay, that's a first level of defense to getting the problem fixed, instead of waiting until it's time to release to figure out you have a database change. So the last part of that is everything okay? So it's very simple, clean slate, build up a new database. If we don't get any errors in that process, it's a first level of feedback. If we get an error, we can do something about it. Now, I said I wanted to demonstrate pipelines. So this might be the first part of your process. This gives you the fastest feedback. Once you're done with that, though, what if you could also then kick off a process that simulates what it's like to do a production database update? And in that process, we start out with, instead of a clean slate, we restore a production backup into some sort of staging environment. On that backup, then, we apply all of the changes after whatever point that backup was taken. So if we have an application in production, and if you just were numbering straight up your migrations for your database, if you're at version 5 of your database and you have version 6 checked in now that you're developing right now, this step could test applying version 6. If you have 6 and 7, it could apply 6 and 7. So this is a second level of defense to see if anything is wrong with your process to see if anything's wrong with your database migrations. And then the last step I'm going to plug in here is, well, why don't we capture some timing statistics as well, since we're simulating this, what it's like in production. Wouldn't it be nice to know if we're going to need like 5 minutes to do a database update because we're doing something that affects a lot of information? And then we might want to reconsider how we roll that out or how we apply the change to try and speed that up. So we can capture some timing stats. Again, this is all subjective. The nice thing about TeamCity, though, is it makes it very easy to compose this together as a pipeline. So the first part of this kicks off, and then the next part kicks off. And then the last part I'm not going to get set up today because it'd be a lot of time, but it's fairly trivial after this point, is to run a production update would be the last step of this process that would form a database delivery pipeline. Now, that last step would be manual. I put the clever little person kicking off the build process on the second step, because all of this up to step 2 could be automated so that every time somebody checks in a database change, all of these scripts are run and all of these first 2 processes are kicked off to just give you your very first line of defense whether or not there's a problem. then come time to release the application, you could have this third step in here that's a manual approval that somebody runs. So let's hop over to TeamCity and let's look at what it's like to set that up. So I'll go back to the home page here. Actually, I will close out a bunch of these. Go back to the home page here. And I have my past builds, but we're going to set up a new one. So I'll go into the project settings to do that. I might even decide in this case, hey, you know what, this is more of a sub project and I'd like to group these things together. So let's do database pipeline as our sub project. Inside of the sub project, then I can create a new build configuration. I've already wired up a lot of this so that we don't have to set all of this up by hand for you guys. So we'll do first drop and create the database and get that level of feedback. So I'm creating a build for that very first block to just drop and create the database. Now in this case, I've already set up the repository, so I'm just going to attach an existing repository and work off of that. I've got this payroll database repository, and I'll attach that so I don't have to set all of that up. Then in the build steps, actually you can see the auto detect picked up a lot here already. What I want to do is I have a script checked into my repository called CI drop and create from migrations. I'm going to just check that box and say use selected. So what that did is just set up a build step that basically calls a script to drop and create the database from the migrations. And I'm not going to set up any triggers because we'll actually put the trigger on the next part of this pipeline. So if I want to see what this looks like, then this is a MySQL database. This could work with any database. It really depends on what you're using and your migration tool. I'm using MySQL and Flyway if you are interested. I can connect to my instance here. And you can see over on the left, I don't have any database beside the TeamCity database. So by kicking this process off, though, I can actually run that very first level of feedback and see if there are any problems. So not just code, it could be database as well. And we got a failure, so we'll jump in and see. You know what? I'm going to just change the settings here from the suggested because we've got a spacing issue. I'm going to take the name out and execute the option pass. Do that. Save that. This should run this time. Okay, so while that's running, our database should be creating. I can even jump into the log, and it looks like it's successful, but let's take a look at what that script did. And you can see, I don't want to get a lot into the tool, but you can see the script is applying all the different migrations to our database. So theoretically, we just built up our new payroll, and it's called a payroll_CI database. So if I go over to MySQL, I can refresh here. Again, this is just a script checked in the repository, so it could be whatever tools you like to use. And I have my database created just to make sure that everything's okay. To get that very first level of feedback right inside of TeamCity if I mess something up. The next step I want then, again, I wanted a pipeline here. So if everything's okay here, we will also another step that will tell us what it's like to simulate prod or simulate prod update. Create that. And again, I will attach the same repository to it. And then the only thing I really need to set up to hook these two things together is come into the dependencies tab and say, hey, you know what, TeamCity, this step 2 is actually dependent upon step 1. So create and, or let's do drop and create. And this is the one we set up here, and save that. So I've just said, hey, these two build configurations are linked together. So this happens first, then this will happen afterwards. And we'll see what that looks like in the interface here in a minute. Back in the build steps, I can pick the particular scripts I want to execute to go action simulation. Inside of my repository, I have a, I believe this, yep, CD pretest release. I could probably name that a little bit better. It's an old name. So this is a script that will pull a production backup and apply the migrations to it. So I'll save that. But then I also wanted to add a build step for the statistics, the timing statistics, and I have that as a separate script. I could have had that as the same, but I have it separate. I might want to reuse that, for example. I will, again, executable with parameters, and I will pick, in this, I have a test extract timing information. I have really great file names. Sorry about that. Anyways, I'll save that. So I have two steps in this process that will create a simulation database from a production backup, apply migrations to it, and then extract timing information from that. About dependencies upstream. All right, and it failed. That's awesome. I must have done something wrong here. Let's see what we have to say. You know what? I think that in the dependencies, let's just take a look at the settings and see what I did wrong. I might have referenced the wrong thing. Let's see. I think I did actually. This is a separate project. I apologize. I have multiple samples for this. I should have been a little more careful. Let's do shine. And let's do this one right here. I linked to the wrong upstream. So the version control mismatched. So we'll save that and I'll run this. And I'll go back to the home page. It's queued, it's running now. Here, this is the primary. And one thing I love to show while it's running on the builds configuration page is the build chain tab. Now you'll get used to all these tabs if you aren't already. I apologize for jumping around, but only have an hour to demo all this awesome stuff. On the build chains tab though, as a part of the steps in this build chain, you can expand past chains, if you will. I guess it's a great thing that this failed because I can show you, here's that first run I did, and it failed because I had the wrong dependencies set up. I can close that. Here's the second run. Everything was fine because I actually wired the right dependencies together. But this diagram is starting to look like my slide here that I was talking about to begin with. I have first step 1 and then step 2. Same thing here, step 1 and step 2, except this links together the actual build that ran. So number 2 here and number 2 here. So as I run through, if I ran this a bunch of times, I would be able to know which numbers were part of the same chain, so that I know that when I'm testing this production simulation, it's after I've already tested the drop and create step. So I'm not, for example, let's say somebody checks in a migration for version 6, and that passes step 1. And then somebody checks in number 7 migration. I'm not accidentally pulling 7 in here, I'm pulling 6 in. That's what the snapshot dependencies are for. It allows you to know that if you have a chain of builds, that they all run on the same snapshot from version control. Especially important when you get to the deployment step and you want to make sure you're deploying something that's actually tested. So we've got all of this in place. Not too exciting unless we actually see something blow up. So let's look at what happens when we make it. Now, fortunately, I have this staged for us. So I have a new view that we'll create. And I should actually garble this up instead of just, so I apologize, it's not a broken view. Let's break this or at least see if we can break it. So here's the view. Let's just put some garbage in here and save that. And we'll come over here and we'll stage the changes to Git, and we'll go ahead and check in broken new view. So sometimes even with database changes, actually especially with database changes, it's very possible that somebody checked in a broken view as a change to our database, and we might like to find out that there's a problem about it. Now, I actually forgot to put my trigger on the repositories. I apologize, we're running a little short, so I won't add that. What I'll do instead is simulate that, just like we saw on the very first demo, and automatically. This will actually, since there's a change to the repository, run the entire build again. And you'll see that there's a queued build now. And if I click on that, A lot of information on the screen here. What I'm going to do is go back to that build chains tab because I think that'll make sense. So I ran this process. You can see we had 2 and 2 before. Now we have 3 and 3. That we have an exit code here that the process exited with code 1. So something must have gone wrong in our very first check. Now that makes sense because we checked in garbled up view. So let's dive into the build log here in TeamCity and see if we can figure out what went wrong. And TeamCity, of course, can capture the issue. We have an error in our SQL syntax. So we could then go back to our SQL, save it, come back to, I might have closed it. No, I didn't. It's right here. Check that in. Fix the new view. I can commit that then. And then over inside of, I should have set that trigger up again. There's another opportunity I missed. I'll hop back to the, let's hop all the way back to just the project page here. Let's run that second step again. Everything should be okay. While that's running, I'm going to go add that trigger just so that we can, if we have another opportunity here, I'm adding a VCS trigger again, this time at step 2 though. Notice it's at step 2. If I go back to the results here, we have success, but let's look at the build chain. That's all that makes sense to me from this stuff. Close these old ones. So number 4 here was where we fixed things, and number 4 is okay here. So our drop and create, first line of defense, everything checks out, and our production simulate, everything checks out. And if I go over to MySQL just to show you there's actually stuff going on here, we have our CI database, and I have what's called a pretest database. Perhaps prod simulation would be better. I can go inside of here and just look and see if that new view is there. There's another view. And I can query the information in that another view. There's even data in there. That's a one nice thing to note, because we did a production backup, we have real data. Whereas in the CI database, which we just created from nothing, well, there's not going to be any data when I select that. There's nothing. So it's a nice reason why you might want to run both steps. And of course, the production simulation is going to be much more expensive. So that's why it's a good idea to run it separately to very and talk a little bit more about these pipelines because they're just that awesome. I want to point out a few more things. Now, I conveniently set these up so that the numbering has been sequentially the same. These counters are in sync, if you will. I'd like to get them out of sync. So what I'm going to do is just run this particular first step again. I mean, at any point in time, I could say, hey, just test things out again if I wanted to. I don't have to wait for somebody to check something in. If I go back to my home screen now, you can see we've got number 5 here, but we don't have number 5 here. From the build chains tab on the project level now, let me close some of these old ones. You can see we have number 5 here, and we haven't triggered. The reason I wanted to just nobody made changes. So I'm not going to do that right now, though. I just did a rerun of number 5 because what I would like to do is run this again and then get the numbering out of sync here. I'm trying to mess up the numbering so I can show you how you can line up the numbering actually. So now we have, not only did number 5 and 6 only run on the step 1, we haven't done anything with step 2 with that particular run. So I'm going to now push the run button on step 2 so the numbers are messed up, and you'll see that in a minute here. So you see number 6 now and number 5. So they're out of sync, and you're like, whoa, that's weird, because isn't this like a pipeline? Wouldn't it be nice to know that these two are related just by the number itself, so I'm not looking at this screen here? Like, for example, if I'm looking at just the project screen, and I'm looking at my DB pipeline, I see 5 and 6. I have no idea those are related. Because there's a dependency between these two, I can go into step 2. I can go to the settings for it, And then under the build number format, normally this is just an independent counter to this specific step in the process. But I can actually grab an upstream, I can grab the upstream number and add that onto the front of it. And I like to usually put like a dash or maybe parentheses around the counter specific to this build, because all of these could be rerun at any point in time with no changes upstream in the pipeline. So the need for the counter on each step of your process is still there, but it's nice to start your numbering with the very first part of your build chain. So you'll see what that looks like in a minute here. It's hard to explain, it's just easier to show. So what I'll do is go back to the simulate product. I'm going to hit the run button here. Because I clicked that run button, now I should get another run of it. And if I click on the queued build, and I don't like that view. Sorry, I'm jumping around. Let's go to this view for the build chains. Now you can see the numbers were out of whack here. We have 6 and 5. We have 6, 6, and 6. That's really confusing. So let's run this again, just because I like running things, and see if we can get the numbering to make a little more sense to you. Refresh this. See how we went from 5, 6, and 7? That's the counter for step 2. We haven't rerun step 1 at all because we don't need to. Because there's nothing new to find out about that. There's nothing that's changed in the repository, so there's no reason to rerun that step unless we explicitly want to force it to be rerun, which is something you can do. But I didn't do that. So what this is telling us now that we've lined up the numbering is that number 6 means it used number 6 from step 1. We use number 6 from step 1 in both of these 2 runs here. So it's nice to kind of stick that first step's build number into the entire chain so it flows throughout. And you can reuse that at every step in the process to make sure things are lined up. Because now when I'm looking at the home page, for example, I can see the number 6 lines up. And then I know that those 2 are related in terms of this run was built off of this run. And so everything's successful. I can see that right from this view right here. I don't need to go into the build chain to understand that. You can also take those numbers and flow them through your various build tools to stamp assemblies, put version numbers somewhere that gets some stamp version numbers wherever you might want to put them so that you can correlate build artifacts back to the actual build results in TeamCity and be able to pull up those results at any time. So, if you had that, I believe someone said they're packaging up a Debian package, you could stamp that number on there as well and link that back to the TeamCity build. This number 6 doesn't have to be number 6. You can actually go into this very first step, and it could be whatever you would like it to be. If you're on 1.5 of your application, and then you're incrementing the build counter every time you make a change, you could have that as your build number. And then if I go back to the home page, run the entire chain again, we'll give it a second here. You can see we're on 1.5.7 now. So we're running number 7 here, but it's just hard coded 1.5. It also ran the simulation of production. It also has 1.5.7. So maybe that makes more sense for numbering. And this is the 8th one. Any questions at this point? 5 minutes past, so I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, Wes, there is a question from Michael. He's asking, where is this database hosted? Is it some in-memory database or one installed on the build agent?
So I have MySQL installed on my build agent here. But you could also be using an in-memory database if that app applies to your application as well. Typically, what I recommend, though, is you're in a continuous integration environment, use a real deal. At some point in this process, where are my slides? For step 1, maybe you do in memory, then maybe you run it again with the real deal, and then you do this with the real deal, the simulate production update. I would always recommend in your CI build pipeline, do the real deal somewhere.
Yeah, okay. And another question from Eugene. Let's see if you can try to understand it. What if I want prod update depend in one chain from drop an update, and in the second chain from another create DB build configuration?
Yeah, so one of the really nice things about these pipelines, I haven't shown it here, but these can be parallel as well. You could combine, you could have multiple step ones that are independent. So if you will, there could be you could have two separate databases, if you will, and then you could have separate build processes for each of them because maybe you want to run that in parallel for a little speed improvement. Then for each of those, you would simulate the production update. Maybe those are separate and parallel as well. And then last step could be the production update, which is dependent on both of those chains. So parallelism, totally available. Another reason why this build chain I feel like goes underused a lot is an opportunity to compose together whatever process you have in your mind.
Yeah, I don't see any more unanswered questions
Oh,
at the moment.
you know what? I forgot one really cool thing I wanted to show was the timing information. And then we'll wrap up here. So under one of the runs here, any of the runs I made, the parameters tab, I have statistics that I was reporting back. This is via service messages, which is what I was talking about earlier with testing on the fly. You can on the fly report statistics back. Each migration, you can see even number 9, which we created right here in this demo. You can see the value for this build, and you can even see a chart of the values. So if you're curious what it might be like come time to the next release, here's your milliseconds that it took to apply each migration. And this is from simulating the production update. So this is what it would actually be like against your production backup. So the closer that production backup is to reality, you could have your timing information here for how long it's going to take to do your database deployment. All right, that's all I've got for now.
Wes, one quick question from Michael again. If you do parallel builds configurations running, how do you cause the whole build chain to fail? Is it possible?
Yeah, so any step in that process that triggers a failure will stop the rest of it. You kind of saw that when I was running this particular build chain here. We saw back here that I had an error in step 1, so step 2 never ran. You can see snapshot dependency failed. If you'd like to control stop the whole, if you can go to the build queue. All right. Any other questions from anybody?
Well, not that I see here. I think that's
All
it,
right.
yeah.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up at that then. There are a few topics we didn't get to, but we can post some links maybe in the notes for the webinar. We didn't get to the version controlled settings, but you know what? We actually demoed that with what's new in TeamCity 9.1. And the notifications we actually did take a peek at when we were talking about the IDE notifications. The thing that makes TeamCity shine there for me is that the rules for notifications are universal across all channels. So when I'm setting up my notifications, I don't have different rules for different channels. I have IDE, email, and Windows Tray, and the rule types are all the same. So again, I have all these nice options to control when notifications get sent, and it's not specific to some plugin that integrates a particular notification channel, at least for what comes out of the box. Even the Slack notifier, which is a plugin, uses these rules as well. So that's one nice thing is it's the same rules. So you learn the rules for how you want to be notified, which becomes important in not getting hassled in your notifications. And if you want to switch channels, you don't have to do half a day of figuring out how the rules work to get notifications. I'll hand it back to you, Jaeger.
Yeah, so I think that's it for today, and thanks everyone for participating. Sorry for some audio issues that you might have experienced. We'll have this webinar recording on our blog, along with some follow-up Q&A and maybe some links from Wes. So thanks a lot, and see you next time.